Our panel today is going to focus on how sustainability can be used in terms of the HR construct within companies to attract and retain talent. In terms of my background, my name is Gonen. I teach a course on social entrepreneurship at Columbia Business School. I am a Columbia Business School graduate from 2004. I was fortunate enough to have the business school invest in my first company in 2004, and since that time I've been an entrepreneur in the sustainability space with a small stint in the Bloomberg administration. I'm going to tell you just a quick story that I heard yesterday, and then we're going to open it up to a discussion with the panelists. I was listening to an interview on NPR with Walter Isaacson. Walter Isaacson's written a number of biographies, from a biography on Benjamin Franklin to Einstein to Steve Jobs. And the question he was asked was, what's the difference between somebody who's just a genius innovator and someone who actually can take that innovation and build a company out of it? And he said the one theme that goes throughout all of the innovators who are actually able to build a company is their recognition of how important it is to build teams and teamwork. And that's the crucial factor between someone who's just a eccentric innovator and someone who becomes a great business person, is their ability to build great teams. And that's a lot of what we'll focus on today. So the format we're going to run is I'm going to ask everybody the same question, and then depending on their answers, I'm just going to facilitate a conversation amongst the group, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. And as I ask my first question, I'm also going to ask everybody to just give a brief introduction of who they are and their background. So my first question for the group, and I'm going to ask each of you to individually answer it, is what's one thing that you've seen either at your company or another company from a sustainability perspective that the company has done that has really been able to attract talent or retain talent? And then what's something that you've seen either at your company or another company, you don't need to name that other company, where an executive made a decision that they thought in some way was in the best interest of the company, maybe to the bottom line, but in the end resulted in really damaging the ability to attract and retain talent? We can go around.
Begin?
Yeah,
okay, sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Fenlon, and I'm the global talent leader for PwC. We're a professional services firm. We're approaching 200,000 people. We serve clients in the areas of management consulting, advisory, assurance, tax, and we operate in about roughly almost 160 countries. So that's PwC. I'm responsible for talent. And to the question, Ron, you're asking, well, I can give you a very simple answer in terms of what drives engagement. By the way, I'm also an alum of Columbia, so I'm certainly proud to be here and taught at the business school for a period of time. Sustainability. So in actual engagement in socially responsible activities, in sustainability activities within our firm leads to higher engagement and retention. Now, I'm not saying that because I think that, I hope that it's true. I'm saying it because we've measured it. We know that individuals who are involved in at least one activity each year with us, it could be going down to Belize and teaching kids in Belize. It could be teaching, we've made a $160 million commitment in the U.S. around financial literacy, so it could be in a classroom with kids. It could be involvement in one of our green teams in recycling. We know that those individuals have a 5% lower rate of turnover, which for us is a very big deal, a large firm, than if they're not participating. So actual engagement in that, this is a very central element of our culture, actually does produce is associated with measurable results related to both overall engagement and retention. I guess the flip side to your question, to move on, I think when I think it's really important to think of our organizations as ecosystems. And if you just focus on one lever, so for example, if you're just focused on retention through compensation, right, and that's your overall belief, I think that we've certainly observed that often produces in organizations the inverse impact. It's a much broader. You have to have a much broader perspective in really building the right ecosystem that's aligned with the values of our people, and really listening and understanding those values and those interests and what matters most to them. So.
Great.
So, hello, I'm Michelle Nasir. I'm a partner with Heidrick and Struggles. Our work focuses on changing the world, one leadership team at a time. And so we believe in purpose, right? So as I think about what our firm does that helps to support sustainability, what our firm helps others do, so the clients of the firm, it's about having a purpose and a mission that's meaningful. So that comment about being inspired, being engaged, that is so critical to retention. There's a 20% uptick in productivity, in time with the firm, if you are motivated and engaged by what the firm is doing. And it can be through purpose, which is what we believe, but it can also be through connection. So one of the things that we do as a firm is really try to build connection across our practices and across our locations. And I think next month we're going to be doing something really interesting with Covenant House. They work with homeless youth. We're going to be sleeping on the sidewalk overnight as a firm, office by office, to embody and have empathy with that experience, but also as a fundraiser, right? So we believe in social good. We find the right kinds of organizations to partner with. But I think as a firm and in general, what we believe and teach our clients is about having mission and purpose. If I think about what really detracts and what really leads to lower engagement and attrition, it's lack of authenticity. So a firm that professes to be one thing, but has practices, either talent practices or communication events that are not aligned with that purpose, that's where I've seen the most attrition, the most derailers in terms of this topic.
How, when you say that there's companies out there that profess to have one type of mission or one type of practice, but in reality there's something very different that actually goes on, I know it's hard to put a percentage behind this, but how common do you think that is in today's business world?
So it's a good question. I wouldn't put a number on it. I'd say it's often unintentional. So I'll give an example of a wonderful retailer that created the statement and the part of the culture, be yourself, bring your best self to work, right? Wear your values, wear who you are. And that had a wonderful impact on the employees and on the leadership, until one day someone in the distribution center wore a Confederate flag over to the warehouse. And so that was a real moment, a real test. You know, how authentic were they in this desire to be yourself, and where do they draw the boundaries? And the fact that they engaged in a healthy dialogue with that location and across the company about those kinds of boundaries helped them to be authentic. But you could easily see them going a different way, right?
Okay.
So it's really about being intentional, understanding where those boundaries are.
Great, thank you.
My name is Mitchell Gold. I have a home furnishings business called Mitchell Gold plus Bob Williams. We started 25 years ago with $60,000 and have built the company to about a $150 million enterprise today. I'm thrilled that we're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. And one of the things that we did was challenged each of our stores to have an event to celebrate our anniversary. But the real challenge was to do something philanthropic, much more than they had ever done before. And we asked each of the managers of the store to get involved in a grassroots charity in the local community that they could really participate in. We would give them a cash contribution, the store would, but I really wanted the people in the store to get involved with that charity. And they had to ultimately get it approved because we wanted to make sure it was something worthwhile. But it's been such a great year. We've actually done 20 events as of last night. But each of the cities that I go to now, I see that the management and the people in the store are so much more engaged. And when you are in Dallas, Texas, and you have a woman come with her 2 children who was homeless, and the charity that helped them got them a home, got them a place to live, got the design community to furnish the home, and to really give people a And when you talk about homelessness, it really has strikes such a chord with me. When people are homeless, it's really hard for them to have a stable job. It's really hard for them to think about anything much more than survival. So when you can give somebody that kind of an opportunity, it really makes an impact. And I can see and feel that the people that are working for us, we're going to have them for a long time. And as part of that, we ask that of each of our management people. We have 4 senior vice presidents. One of them is 52, but all the others are under 40, and they've all been with us for at least 15 years. So I know that having them engaged in the kind of things that we as a company do has kept them with us.
Taking a company from $60,000 invested to $125 million is rarely done and an exceptional feat, especially for someone to be there during that entire period of time. Have you seen your focus or attention to sustainability, interaction that the employees have with your company change during that time, during the ups and downs, just the way society may have changed, the way you may have changed as just a person, or do you feel like it's been consistent throughout the growth of the company?
Well, when we first started the company, we were in the furniture business, and literally like a month after we started it, I was in New York and got the New York Times, and there was a front page article about how the ozone layer was being depleted and the environment was really in trouble, and one of the worst abusers was the furniture industry in North Carolina. So in the olden days, I got my AT&T credit card and went to a phone booth and called Bob and said, you're not going to believe this, but we are in this business that's like abusing the environment. And it's not that I was anti-environment, but I was not a real big pro either. I didn't really understand it that much. So we decided right then and there that there was no way we could have a business like that, and we found out what we could do to be environmentally responsible. And coincidentally, at that moment, a new foam, which is the biggest abuser, was invented, and it didn't emit CFCs in the air. So we did that, and then everything from that, the lighting that we did in the factory, recycling, everything became part of our culture. So when the horrible recession of 2008 came along, we didn't do anything other than what we had already been doing. And we dug in our heels, in fact, and really, because by then we had realized that there are a lot of people out there who do care about this world. And things that we were doing resonated with them, whether it was our daycare center at the factory, our healthcare program. So we, through all of these times, have just stuck with it and been better and better. And I'll tell you, last night, being in Toronto with 400 people and having people come up to you and say, "Oh, I love your furniture. I love the way it looks, but I love the way you run the company. I love the culture there." So,
okay,
it's profitable.
Yeah, great.
And then the negative thing I would say is. Actually, a few weeks ago, I was speaking to the Rotary Club in Taylorsville, North Carolina, and somebody told the story of he had a friend who came to work for us, and he asked her why she came to work for us, and she said, because they don't yell. And I'd never really thought about that much, but we don't yell, and we're not, I would never think to yell at one of my employees. I might give them a really bad look, and then it wears off after 3 minutes because I want to have good energy. I don't want to have that. And then I found out that there was this factory, in fact, where the president would run around and yell at people. So, bad karma.
All right, thank you.
That's great. So, I'm Sabine Chalmers. I'm the Chief Legal and Corporate Affairs Officer at a company called Anheuser-Busch InBev. We're one of the world's leading beer companies and make wonderful brands like Budweiser and Stella Artois and Beck's, and hopefully you recognize a number of these brands. On a personal level, I'm of German and Indian origin. My dad was German, my mom from India, and I've grown up pretty much all over the world, and which makes me an ideal candidate to be a U.S. citizen, which is what I just became a few months ago. So I'm now an American. So I have the good fortune at my company to look after both the legal affairs of the company, but also corporate affairs, which includes communications, regulatory affairs, and also the corporate social responsibility program. And I have a 14-year-old daughter who, as she was growing up, would very often ask me the question, kind of, Mommy, what do you actually do at the company? Because when I listen to you on the phone, it sounds kind of terribly boring, right? And she said, and I get the impression it has something to do with beer, right, which Daddy drinks a lot of. It has something to do with beer. And it has something to do with making money for other people as well, right, you know. And I thought to myself, well, one, that's very astute, you know, that she's making these conclusions. But I also thought to myself, wow, if that's all she thinks I do, I'm not certain that that is the sort of legacy, you know, that I want to leave for my daughter, or does that necessarily make me proud and fulfilled as a person? And I think as a management team, we've had a lot of conversations around this, because I think at the end of the day, in whatever work environment you work in, particularly in a corporate environment, you don't just want to be known for making whatever product it is that you make and for making money, you know, for shareholders. There's got to be a lot more to that. And hence, it is something we try to focus on very much at our organization, and particularly because we are, you know, in an industry which is about, you know, making beer, about, you know, making alcohol, etc. And we're very large, and we operate in a number of different, you know, countries. But we want to stand for something more than just the product that we make. And we know that people in our company, the 150,000 people that operate there, are, you know, going to want to wake up and tell their kids that they do more than, you know, just make money. So in terms of purpose, you know, within our organization, we, as a management team, together with the CEO, have evolved our dream. And our dream, as it is expressed today, is, you know, we strive to build the best beer company, bringing people together for a better world. And it can sound like, you know, one of those great sort of corporate strap lines. And our CEO always says that, you know, this is the kind of dream that you have to bring to life through actions. And what we try to do, therefore, is to identify actions which are authentic to who we are as a company, but are also advancing our dream. And similarly, we have found that when we do implement them, all the stats are showing that it builds engagement. The two examples that I'll give you is we celebrate 2 days on a global basis, not just in the US, which is our largest market, but across the world. One is World Environment Day, where we really focus on every year having as many folks out in the community as possible to work on projects that relate to our business. And as you can imagine, we use a lot of water in our products. We operate in a lot of brewing communities. What can we do to make those communities better? The other day that we focus on is we call it Global Beer Responsible Day. And it's a day when we get out into the streets with our customers, our retailers, etc., to essentially say, okay, we make beer, and it's about having a good time. But at the end of the day, we're parents, we're members of communities, we care about where we operate, and how can we help to educate people and partner with people around us to enjoy our product, but do so in a responsible fashion. And again, I mean, I think those 2 days, people really get into it, absolutely love it, and it builds engagement. That's two examples of what I'd say we do within our organization to try to drive meaning. In terms of, you know, kind of what have I seen that hasn't worked so well, I'm very sensitive to this, I suppose, because of my background and because we're a global company as well, that I think it's very important for organizations, especially when they do this sort of thing, to be culturally sensitive to the fact that programming or initiatives or things that people care about in one country might not be what's top of mind or really resonates. You know, what's important in the US might not be necessarily appropriate or important in China or in India or somewhere else, and always to have that top of mind.
Being the global, you know, the person responsible for legal affairs globally for a global company, what are some things that you've seen that are differences in terms of what either takes place in a certain country or region and what's acceptable and not acceptable in a certain country or region? And then how do you manage that across the global organization? That's one question. And then the other kind of second part of that question is, when you guys merged together, did you run into any sort of cultural expectations in terms of how people are supposed to be treated once that merger happened?
Oh, which merger?
Sorry.
No.
The big InBev, Budweiser, the big...
The Budweiser combination.
Yes.
No, I mean, no, it's interesting. The reason I'm asking the question is I've been with the group for 10 years now, and when I first joined, it was a merger of Belgians and Brazilians, so a Belgian company and a Brazilian company. Then in 2008, we combined with Anheuser-Busch, which was predominantly a U.S. culture. And then last year, we had a combination with Grupo Modelo in Mexico, which is Mexican, right? So I've been so lucky. I mean, it's been and we're so lucky at the company because we have this amazing sort of geographical spread. But just seeing how, the one thing I would say is the following. I think at heart, all people are the same. You know, they want meaning and they want to be respected. And I think so long as you remember that in anything that you do, any sort of merger or anything else, yes, you'll make mistakes, but so long as top of mind, that's all people are looking for, is to be heard, to be respected, and I think that's sort of been a key piece of it. Having said that, when you turn to the legal piece, sure, I mean, laws differ across the globe. The level of regulation differs enormously between, for example, the U.S. and some of the emerging countries. So, I mean, the way we deal with it is we aim to have great people, great local hires in as many countries as we possibly can. I feel especially privileged and proud that our function is one of the most, even within the company, kind of the most diverse, with the ability to grow a lot of local talent. I mean, we have great Chinese lawyers, great Brazilian lawyers, etc. And, again, it's just respecting the local laws, the local cultures, and having local people that you trust help to guide the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Ron, if I could add to that, because one theme I was thinking about as I was listening to each of you, in terms of something that cuts across cultures, that I think is so important, and goes in some ways to one of your first questions. As much as we all no doubt make financial commitments, what this is really about, sustainability that engages people, is about real involvement. So whether it's at within your stores, we call them green teams, actually people coming together, and this goes to millennials. We did a study of 40,000 millennials within our firm. And one of the things that emerged was a huge priority and focus on being part of a cohesive community, cohesive team. And so much of our sustainability and corporate responsibility is focused around teams, going into schools. We committed 1 million hours of community service in the U.S. of our people getting into schools, teaching financial literacy in teams. We do a lot of team competitions, so green teams that are competing with each other to come up with the best ideas that will have the most impact on reducing, for example, our impact, reusability, recycling. And that's what I think when it gets woven into the actual experience during work hours, so it's not something that's tacked on or is kind of a bolt-on, but really becomes part of our culture. And I think that's what, when it's done, is just kind of something that's going to look good from a brand standpoint, a positioning standpoint, versus really part of the fabric of who we are. And that's something that we're living, that's sustained over years. That's something I think is a critical difference, and we found that's consistent around the world.
Thank you. How many Columbia Business School students do we have in the room right now? Okay. And the rest of folks are from, how many people do we have that are working at a company right now? Okay. I look out in the room here, and it looks like it's about 80% women. And so,
smart room.
What's that?
It's a smart room.
Yeah, it's a smart room. Smart room. But so that's gonna lead into my next question. So I was asked to moderate the panel. I didn't choose the panelist or put it together. And interestingly, it's 4 executives, and it's split male and female, which is not indicative of what we see today in terms of the C-suite or the executive suite out there. So fortunately, whoever put the panel together did it in the way that it really probably should operate in the business world. So my next question is, what can companies do to better attract women into business, retain women into business, and then what's going to need to happen in order to see more women in the C-level suite? Is that just a matter of time now that there's more women in business in the next 10 or 15 years? That's just going to happen? Or does something need to change? So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is there any federal regulation that you think needs to change, whether it be around reproductive health or maternity, paternity leave, that would be advantageous to recruiting and retaining talent? All right, so why don't we start kind of with you, then we'll go to you, then you, and we'll take you last. We're going to go step by step.
I feel very lucky to start with this question. I actually run the inclusion practice for our firm, and I forgot to mention that I'm also an engineer and an MBA from Columbia, so doubly blessed, as you will. So there are lots of things that need to change to make the workplace inclusive and attractive for everyone, not only women, people of color, people with different sexual orientations. There are a lot of assumptions that we've made in how we've built organizations today. So think about the evolution from an industrial society, factories and manufacturing, and then bringing that into a business context. The idea of hierarchy, the idea of being in a certain place for a certain number of hours. These are the assumptions upon which our businesses are built. And so the first step, I think, is challenging our assumptions. So one of the things we need leaders to do is challenge their assumptions. Should I promote Joe or should I promote Jane? And what am I looking at when I'm making that decision? Is it actually the work they're doing? Or is it, as research shows, when I'm looking at Joe, I'm looking at his potential. When I'm looking at Jane, I'm looking at her performance. So there's some unevenness that just occurs in the natural culture and human nature of who we are. Women are less likely to self-nominate themselves. They're less likely to think that they're ready. They're going to want all 100 boxes checked. Yep, I did that, I did this, I'm ready to be promoted. And my boss must know that. He's going to pat me on the shoulder and say, yeah, Jane, you're ready. Let's have you be CEO. But that's not how it works, right? And so the first thing we've got to do is change the assumptions. The second thing we've got to do is challenge the leaders, right? And I think you're asking, are there laws or rules that will help things to level the playing field? I think equal pay for equal work would be one that I would be very supportive of. I think there are other things that we can think about, but I think the workplace in general has got to evolve to be more virtual, to be more embracive of all of the demographic generations, millennials, baby boomers, Gen Y, Gen X, you name it.
Okay, great. Why don't we take it and then we'll take...
Sure, yeah, it's a great question. I didn't know you were going to ask that question. Coincidentally, I was actually at the meeting with the leader at the United Nations today. This pin I'm wearing, go to heforshe.org. Check it out. It's a very, very important global initiative being led by the United Nations. So diversity and inclusion, of course, is an extraordinarily important value for us as a firm at PwC. A couple observations. Last spring, in April, we launched globally Aspire to Lead, which is PwC's leadership series for women. We actually launched it with a global live video webcast from Menlo Park at Facebook with Sheryl Sandberg. And we brought in students from around the world and then ran events all over the world at hundreds of universities around the world and workshops that followed on leadership skills. So two things. So obviously Sheryl was sharing her point of view from the Lean In perspective, the book she had just, and Lean In for Graduates that had just come out. We were also talking about how organizations need to lean in, right? So it's not one or the other. And that can mean a lot of different things. I think for men, it can mean challenging ourselves in terms of our own blind spots. It can mean having really strong talent practices in place where we challenge ourselves and identify diverse, high-potential talent, people who have aspirations and encouraging those aspirations to flourish. Really getting sponsorship, as we call it, someone who's going to advocate for an individual and help them navigate, the organization and get them exposure, connect them with career opportunities. Having a flexible culture is very important for all of our people. And we've done we had a team competition. We had 2,000 teams come up with different ideas about how we could improve flexibility. I think that's part of it as well. Of course, benefits are important. We offer very competitive benefits, including domestic partner benefits. But for us, it's been about both very deliberate investments in leadership development, in what we call talent management, so very, identifying individuals who have the aspiration, encouraging those aspirations to flourish, and then connecting them with opportunities. So check out heforshe.org, and you can certainly Google Aspire to Lead as well. It's all there, and we're going to be doing another major global event in February around this topic.
I just disagree slightly about women don't put themselves forward and say that they're ready for something, because after Cheryl's book, every woman that worked for me leaned in and told me they should be promoted and how much more money they should make. So, I think, unfortunately, the reality is it's a complicated problem, and it really is not easy, and it depends on where you are and a lot of things going on. In a smaller company, it gets even a little more complicated. But I think ultimately, women. Barbara Turf, who used to be the CEO of Crate & Barrel, I always remember her telling me 20-some years ago that she really judged a company by the way they treated a woman when she was pregnant and had the baby and afterwards and brought the child up. And it was one of the things that made Bob and I really take a look at having a daycare center on our property. And the reason we really started it is because I realized that a woman who worked for us who was in charge of HR, around 4 o'clock, I'd be talking to her, but I lost her because her whole mind was on getting out on time so she could pick up Aaron, who now works for us, by the way, so that she could pick up Aaron.
You've proved the point of retention.
Absolutely. It really is incredible. But that's what her mind was on. And I asked her one day, I said, I just feel like you're not here. And she told me, and she said I forgot, it was something like she got fined $5 a minute for every minute that she was late picking up the child. And it was a big inspiration for us to put a daycare on our property. And I think when you do things like that, and part of the daycare is if I'm talking to Melissa and it's 7 o'clock at night, somebody stays in the daycare with a child until the parent is finished working. Because we have design people who are around certain times of the year for furniture markets and so on. They could be working until 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night, but there's always somebody there as long as your child is there. And I think that kind of thing really helps it more in the workplace. And I think ultimately, though, it's up to leadership to mentor and say, people come from different backgrounds, whether they're women or financially disadvantaged or whatever it is. And everybody needs a little different mentoring. And I think the most exciting part of my job anyway is now, as we get older, to really nurture people so that they can move on and do bigger and better things. But she did leave the company for a while to become a teacher and realized that she really didn't like that. And she came back to work for us. But her son, who was in our first day care, is now working for us at an executive IT position.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Well, if you could bear with me, I might try to approach this from a slightly different angle because I totally agree with all the comments that have been made. I mean, I don't think we can underestimate the role that leaders have to play to challenge their own thinking or existing thinking, and how powerful role models can be, as well, particularly within organizations. But I have this sort of personal belief that, in fact, in some ways, a lot of progress is made in terms of diversity and inclusion at the sort of more junior levels of an organization, when folks come in, right? And in fact, I suppose many companies would almost find that it's like, 50-50 men and women, at that level. Certainly, all the statistics show that some of the more talented graduates that come out of the schools tend to be, the stronger candidates, even the ladies of it. It's where the challenges arise as you go further through the organization. And I do think absolutely some of it has to do with the sort of policies that you have in place, be it around daycares or flexibility or other things to make things easier. But I also think some of it has fundamentally to do with just ensuring that people continue to have the strength and the confidence to challenge the status quo as they go through their careers. Because I think sometimes it's not just the personal choices that you have made, but it just gets tiring and you just give up and you go and do something else. And I do have this very optimistic belief that actually the new generation and millennials, and I see this again in my 14-year-old, it's just a completely different world that she's living in. And I'll give you two examples. First example is my husband, Richard, he used to be a lawyer, but when I got my job at InBev 10 years ago and we moved to Belgium, he gave up his job. And he said, I want to be a stay-at-home dad. Because he said, you're always going to... I told him, I said, I'm always going to be smarter than you. And he said, great, and he said, and he said, you love whizzing around and you're always going to earn more than me and this. But he said, I have a personal belief. I don't want Natasha brought up by nannies. I don't care if they have a daycare center or this, that, and the other. I think she needs to have a parent at home. And you know what? The best parent for that is going to be me because of your career aspirations. Now, in her worldview now is that it's perfectly acceptable for the mum to be the high flyer and for the dad to stay at home. And, and actually his job is as important as my job, right? So kind of that's one. And I see this more and more, that she's living in a world in which that's, becoming more common. The other thing I thought was extraordinary was, as I'm sure many people did yesterday, were very impacted by the media around Tim Cook's announcement, right? And I was talking to my husband about it and saying, hey, this is really amazing and all this. She looked at me and she said, what are you guys going on about? What's the big deal? This is like really normal, right? And I thought, again, this is the world that the next generation, especially in this country, and then I think this, will become more global, will grow up in. And the key question, I think, for us now, and particularly leaders in organizations, is how do we continue to raise those millennials, and particularly when they come into organizations, to continue to give them the confidence to have a voice, to say to us old guys, frankly, the world is changing, and these are, the sorts of things that you have to have, in your mind. On a personal note, as a closing thing, I'll just say, for example, at her school, her dad is really into, when she started, there were all these boy sports that she wanted to do that they just didn't offer up, and he was in there saying, hey, she's much more talented than a bunch of these guys, she should be able to do this and that and the other, so that she has the confidence to take this with her as she goes through life. And and I think there's a huge piece around all of that, not just as leaders but as parents and as members of society.
And millennials do have a chance to say that they think something is wrong, they have to change, and they have to get out and vote.
Yeah.
Well, and you too, as a new citizen.
Yeah.
But
Yes,
I wanted to add that as an individual, there are also things that we can do. I like to think about it as hacking the system. And so how do we hack the system that has some beliefs that are not healthy for the organization as it evolves? It's easy to bring in diverse talent at entry level because, you know what? The demographics have changed. Yeah. And there are more women, there are more people of color, there's more everything, right? So it's easy to bring in a representative workforce at entry level. It's what you do inside the company that helps them to stay. So how do you identify those high performers and those high potentials across all groups? How do you think about bias interrupters or bias hacks, as I like to call them? So what do you do? And one great example at Google, where I worked before here, Alan Newstad, who's the head of engineering, we talked, we're like, the women are not nominating themselves as engineers. They're not getting promoted. What are we going to do? And we in HR were like, okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Should we do this? How about this experiment? He said, I'm done with that. I'm sending out a note. And now every year he sends out a note at nomination time. Please nominate yourself. And you know what? We're almost back at 50%. And so, it's those simple things that make a big difference.
The other thing I just want to say, because what you said really resonated with me in the sense of this sense of how do you create within your organization a healthy openness for candor and challenging the status quo, a free flow of ideas. And we know, and again, research supports this, right, that diversity drives innovative thinking. We know that. Mm-hmm. There is no organization, no industry today that you can compete in where you don't have to be innovative, where you have to be continually challenging, rethinking, restaging, reinventing. And recognizing that, and then in our firm, the majority of our people are millennials. And absolutely expect to have a voice, absolutely expect to be heard. And part of that is, so our leaders challenging our own mindsets, our own assumptions, for example, the stay-at-home dad, working mom, that's an example of one. And I referenced, the he for she, the mindsets, the blind spots that we all carry around. We're actually doing a lot of work around that as well, really at the leadership level of the firm. Google blind spots. Just Google blind spots and go to Nasir and Benaji's work in that area. Harvard psychologist who's done very powerful work on how all of our blind spots can get in the way of driving innovation, creativity, and creating an inclusive culture. So it's a great point.
Yeah, I have a question for you on maternity and paternity leave, and then a kind of a follow-up question on how a medium-sized company can handle something like that or can't. You have companies and offices in parts of the world where there's incredible maternity and paternity leave. Is that something that can't be exported to the United States or other countries that don't have that type of maternity and paternity leave because it would make your office in that country just simply not competitive? Or has anyone looked at it and said, hey, if we actually brought that type of maternity leave here from Sweden or from Denmark or this country, we could actually attract amazing talent and differentiate ourselves? So that's kind of one question for the global companies. And then from a extended maternity leave question for a medium-sized company, is that just something that's just impossible to do simply because at a large company there's people that can take over those roles? So why don't you go ahead and start that answer, and then
I would answer by saying proper planning prevents poor performance. And I don't mean in terms of getting pregnant, but I mean in terms of going on maternity leave or paternity leave. If you prepare, and we've had a situation recently where somebody was going off on leave, and I had asked, I said, it's a couple months away while everything's cool now. Tell me who you think should take over certain things and lay out for the next 6 months, because I want this to be a great time of your life. And this person didn't do anything, and then all of a sudden one day just wasn't there anymore. And I have to tell you, that's not good for any size company, because whether you're running a company with a gazillion people or 800 people. So I think that for me, as I've gotten older and had more people out on maternity leave, and I really want people, men and women, to enjoy this time of their life. But you have to let the company run also.
Right. So if the government decided we're going to replicate the Northern European model of a year and a half of maternity, paternity leave, that's something that it seems like you as an individual, you're obviously a very caring person, would say, hey, that's a great idea. But you as a business person who manages a medium-sized company, would you look at that and say, hey, that's a great idea for our country to do, but it's got to be focused on larger companies that can very easily move people in and out of those positions. A company our size, we couldn't handle someone being out a year and then coming back.
I'm not a Republican. I mean, really, that is the kind of thing that ultimately, we'll find 100 reasons not to do something. But if it's, there's a lot of government regulations. I embrace them when they happen. You can't fight them. So how do we make it work for us? And I find those to be like excuses that Republicans say. But anyway, we're around voting time. We have a big election in North Carolina.
So from a InBev and Anheuser-Busch perspective, you obviously have offices in places where there's incredible maternity and paternity leave, and then offices in other places where there's no or limited regulation. Has anyone ever looked at, would it be a competitive detriment to our business if we brought that type of maternity and paternity leave here because we just would not be competitive with our competitors who weren't doing that? Or would it be just an amazing way to attract and retain incredible talent?
Well, let me kind of answer that in two ways. I mean, I'll be completely transparent and honest. I don't think we've done the exercise sort of internally of, should we harmonize, right, the approach across a global basis. I mean, obviously what we absolutely do and are committed to doing is to ensuring that we absolutely respect what the local laws and practices are. I mean, one of the things I would say as a mum, right, is that how you feel when you have a child and what you want to do is such a it's such a personal thing, right, that in very many ways is not like if in my case, right, I was so ready to go back after 6 weeks, right. I was like going out of my mind, right, and I was a much better mother when she was 6 months older or a year older. That's when I really wanted to be sort of at home, right. So it worked, and I was in the States at the time. It worked very well for me. You know, I'm not sure that had I had a year, it would have been something that I had wanted or this, that, and the other. Obviously, the thing that was most important to me at the time was, whatever the time was that I felt that my employer was, and I was at a different company at the time, that they didn't think I suddenly didn't care about my career or I had lost, I was a different person, right, because I was a mom. And I think hearing those things from them, that fantastic news, enjoy this time, we're really going to miss you, but, you know, don't worry, all this stuff will wait for when you get back, I almost think is kind of more important from a company culture perspective versus saying, you know, by the way, across the globe, we're going to give you this, right? And it's a personal perspective, right? So I think, you know, I think in some ways that's what's most important. The other thing I would say is I totally agree with the approach to planning. And one of the things that we found within our organization is that, you know, firstly, we have one of our great ladies here who's having a baby soon, so it's very exciting. As soon as the person comes in, firstly, it's a magical thing. It's so wonderful, right? And I think it's it's the sort of thing everyone's very, very pleased for. And firstly, of course, enjoy the time and then come back and you're going to have a great career. But also one of the things that we try to do is to use that opportunity to say, and let me give you a specific example. We have our head of legal in the UK who's going on maternity leave for 6 months. And she let me know as soon as she was ready. And we both worked together to say, wouldn't this be a great opportunity for one of our lawyers from Belgium to come and live in the UK for 6 months and to look after her workload, have a completely different experience from what he was doing until she came back. And obviously with planning, those are the types of wonderful career moves, you know, you can make happen. Obviously we're lucky, we are a large organization, so we can do that more effectively.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on that from a global organization perspective in terms of creating uniform policies when it comes to maternity or paternity leave?
Yeah, we that's not something I've looked at, and obviously practices vary. We offer very competitive benefits, but it does vary by country in terms of the norms. I would go actually kind of a similar place. What we've found is, in addition to the actual maternity, paternity, parental leave benefits, okay, after you get through that, you still have a long, long, long way to go, right, as a parent. And I have 4 kids. My wife and I have 4 kids. So, and now it's about creating a culture where there's openness and transparency about how we all want to lead full lives, right? We all want to lead full lives, and we're not robots, and that requires a lot of flexibility in the culture. It might mean flexibility for a given team in terms of what time someone arrives in the morning, what time they need to leave, doctor's appointments, all school, all sorts of things. And so I'm not afraid to articulate those needs. What we found was we had a culture years ago where I didn't want you to think badly of me, that somehow I'm not committed to my work, right? And or that it would somehow be held against me. So we really tried to open up the dialogue. And it had to be modeled with our leaders authentically, right? So they're talking about how they balance it all. And then at the team level, giving our associates permission, encouraging them to be open about and by the way, it's also true, this is broader than just kids. It could be a single person, doesn't have kids, but they want to have a life too. And maybe they want to get to the gym or have a social obligation, whatever it is. So it's opening up that dialogue within our teams and planning, exactly. And actually baking this into, for example, an engagement team plan. So maybe you're going to leave today early because you've got something. And it's no less important if it has to do with kids or if it's something else that is important to you. So I think this cultural aspect is a very important, beyond of course, the formal policies and the benefits matter. Of course they do. But then there's this, I think, a much longer piece.
I would just add that I think it's easier to do in the professional services context. And so your firm and my firm, it's easier for the team to be open with one another and be flexible because the work ebbs and flows, or it's ways you can compartmentalize it and still be effective. The only thing that I would add is one thing that we're trying to do as a firm is really encourage our male colleagues to take their paternity leave. There's no stronger signal than having both parents take that time, that special time. And so that's one thing that we're trying to do in our offices.
Okay, great. So now I'd like to turn the conversation to environment, as in our environment. The one thing that I found just spending a lot of my career in the environmental space is that things have changed significantly over the last decade in terms of C-level focus on either the company's environmental footprint or the changes that are going on in the environment and how it affects their business. That being said, my sense is that at most companies, it's still something that's relegated to sort of corporate social responsibility position. The C-levels are not necessarily thinking about it directly in terms of how it impacts their business. But I could be wrong there, and I do see things changing rapidly. So I'd like for you guys to just kind of talk about how your company views its environmental footprint just as a company, how much it thinks that its employees actually care about the environment, and then what are the changes that you're seeing out there. I'd like to start with InBev, Anheuser-Busch. You guys actually have a very specific focus, I think, probably around recycling because of aluminum, glass, plastic, cardboard. It actually goes right to your bottom line, but there's a number of things that you deal with in terms of transportation. So we can kind of go around the room and just kind of focus on where does environment rank in terms of importance within your company and ability to attract and retain employees.
Well, I would say that at our company, the first thing I'd say is there's a very authentic commitment to it because all aspects of the product that we make have an impact on the environment in some way or another. Be it the water that we're using, the ingredients that go into the product, and how we interact with farmers, across the globe. You mentioned the glass, you mentioned the cans, et cetera. Our brewery footprints, et cetera. It is essentially so. My team, in terms of CSR and communications, really we have a supporting role when it comes to the environmental sustainability agenda in terms of helping to drive programming, communicate, get employees out on things like World Environment Day, etc. But the agenda is really owned by our supply organization and our breweries and the folks in our procurement and other teams. And I think one of the really amazing things about a global organization, and I suppose the way that we do it, is that it's amazing how every single country in the world probably does it slightly differently, but always has a great idea. For example, when we had the combination with Anheuser-Busch, the work that they did with farmers across the U.S., or what they did around the recycling of cans, which was, or donating water, during times of trouble, or natural disasters, was something that AB had been doing for a long time, and they'd figured out how to do, very, very well. Whereas our organizations in Brazil, just because I think Brazilians in general, this is a generalization, but have a lot of sensitivity towards the protection of the environment around them, were doing amazing work when it came to watershed protection, and working with the communities around their breweries, right? Whereas in China, the issue was more about emissions, etc. And I think what the supply organization has been able to do is they run competitions, they have targets, they have all sorts of things around sharing best practices, so that you're taking what they do really well in one community and then saying, say in Brazil, and saying, how do we apply this to China, right? In terms of making them more efficient when it comes to water conservation, all this, that, and the other. And the other thing that they do is, which is very in line with the way we run our business and performance targets, is they're always ranking who is the best, right? So who is the best at water conservation? And if you say, I don't know, the US is here, but say China is there or Mexico is there, how do you make sure those other countries become just as efficient? And no excuses that it's different locally or this costs more or we do things different, etc. And I think it's been very effective, across the organization. But what the secret to it, I believe, has been that it's very authentic to our culture, and it's owned by the supply and the procurement organizations and the brewery communities within which we operate. Yeah.
It's a big part of our company, as I was alluding to, because when we started, we found out that we were an abuser of the environment. So over the years, it's become a part of everything that we do in our stores, recycling, the packaging that we use, and so on. I think what's exciting for me is to see that our younger people, frankly, often come in and don't really think that much about the environment and aren't as aware of it as one might think they would be. But by being in a company that thinks about it and acts on it, they've become a lot more intelligent about it, or a lot more caring about it. But my real pride and joy is our CEO, our Chief Environmental Officer. He's a fellow that comes from a rather typical Southern background, and some of the baggage that comes with that, of what they envision government policies to be and so on. And because he was the engineer, I put him in charge of making sure that we were learning as best we could all the newest and best things that we could do. And now he is totally so on board with it. It's incredible. He is such a changed person. He even believes that gay people should be able to be married. So I think it has to be part of your culture.
Thanks.
It really does have to be part of your culture. I mean, we sponsor events at Davos about green tech, clean technology. I mean, we're a very small firm, so our efforts are more about recycling, lessening our footprint, hoteling, that sort of thing. But we advocate for those companies that are trying to make a difference in that space. As I said, from our forums in Davos to the kinds of companies we do pro bono work. That's how we think about the environment.
Yeah, I would just echo. I mean, we take this very seriously. We have a partner who is our corporate responsibility leader, which includes environmental sustainability. She reports to our vice chairman. She's the president of our foundation. And it's a global focus as well. So, but the key is, so we have a good story to tell there. But again, it's this cultural issue. So that means in every one of our offices, we have a green team of partners of all, at every level of the firm. And these are people who are really competing as teams to generate the best ideas around recycling, around reuse, around sustainability. Everything from, we had Trees for Threes. So in Dallas, New York, Cleveland, we worked with NBA teams. So every three-point shot meant we planted a tree. Bring your ugliest mug to work day. So that's a competition where people, instead of using paper, well, we reduced paper, like in a year, we were using 1.5 million fewer paper cups. The point is to create some fun, some energy, but to get it owned, right? Sustainability has to be sustainable. And that only happens when it's not just, of course, it's got to be on the agenda of the leadership of the firm, but that's not enough either. It's got to be owned at the ground level where our people are really insisting upon it, and it really is part of our culture. And you think about millennials, so we're doing it in teams, right? And we're using that to open up the ideas and the innovation around environmental sustainability.
Great. I'm going to ask one final question, and then I'm going to open it up to the group for the remainder of the session. And I actually respond to this question sort of 1 to 3 sentences. So one of the things that I always tell my students at the beginning of my first class is I teach a class that's the last semester before they're about to graduate, and I tell them they've gotten a phenomenal education at Columbia Business School. Unfortunately, the 2 classes that they absolutely need for success in business probably weren't offered. We'll work on that a little bit in this class. And those 2 classes are Sales 101 and HR 101. And you can graduate business school being able to out spreadsheet a spreadsheet. But if you don't know how to sell and close, and you don't know how to build teams and manage people, you're really going to struggle and go through some ups and downs as you go through your career. And I've always thought that MBAs should have a primary focus, not just maybe there's 1 or 2 classes, but actually a primary focus on HR, how you hire people, how you fire people, and how you retain people and grow people. So the question I would ask for you guys is just in sort of 1 to 3 sentences is, if you have people out in the audience or MBA students or people getting started in their career from a sustainability perspective, what's, in 1 or 3 sentences, some advice that you would give them in terms of what they should sort of focus on or encapsulize in terms of how they treat and manage people? I know it's difficult to do in such a short answer, but there's one piece of advice you could give from a people management standpoint as it relates to sustainability. You want to start? You can start. Go ahead.
Well, I think treating people respectfully. I think you're absolutely right that understanding how to sell and close a sale, whatever position you have in a company, because that's how you get your ideas across. That's how you get to your peers and your bosses to say, here's my idea, and how do you present that, and how do you sell it, and how do you get that across. And I think the HR part is critical. I didn't realize it, but I'm the chief people officer. I mean, if I'm not doing a lot of that stuff and involved in nurturing and hiring and setting the example, it doesn't really work that much. And the real piece of advice that I would give is, and it picks up on what you were saying, I think a person in a company has to feel that they have opportunity. And in my company is a little bit of a reverse, that there was a time when some people felt that, well, if you aren't gay, then you're not like getting ahead. And I really, when I heard that, I was like, are you kidding me? I don't want anybody in our company to feel, whether they're a man or a woman, straight, whatever, that they don't have opportunity. We have opportunity for the best people here. And once I heard that was going on and attended to it, it really made a difference, I think, in the culture of the company.
Okay.
So treating people with respect is ultimately the thing.
Okay, great.
So I'd say this advice holds regardless of whether you've got a sustainability mandate or not, which is listen and leave your assumptions at the door, right? So many managers today think about millennials as entitled. Why is that? Because they don't have the contextual idea. They haven't really thought about what is that person really thinking. They want a social connection. It's not about being entitled. It's about doing value-added work. So listen and leave your assumptions at the door.
Go ahead.
I would say always recruit people that either are or have the potential to be better than you are, and let them know that. I mean, and 2 things. One, I think makes your job a lot easier when you're working with great teams of people. But also, I think the most fulfilling part of my job is actually working with and having a small part in growing people who I know are going to be like either sitting in my seat or doing like much more interesting things than I've ever aspired to in my life. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
So I would leave you with 2 things. Something we call the PwC Professional. We've just developed this as a point of view around, listen, we all know the world is changing fast. And I think we're all asking, am I ready for that? What does it take to be successful? I'm looking at a long career in a world that's very unpredictable. So yes, technical skills matter, but it's also about relationship skills, being able to listen, to be able to communicate with impact. It's about having a global perspective. Whatever corner of the planet you come from, having a global perspective, having broader business acumen, not just those technical skills, and developing as a whole leader, whole in the sense that none of us are whole. So we've got to work at building self-awareness around the impact we have on others, And then lastly, this is the other thing I'll leave you with, one word, and it's a powerful word, potential. And my guess is we all know people in their lives who you'd say, well, gee, they haven't fulfilled their potential. And maybe we, especially for students, you think about, what is my potential? Will I be able to fulfill my potential in life? How do we create environments in our organizations that do exactly that? So that means I'm going to get feedback that's delivered in a caring way, in a constructive way. It means I'm going to be given opportunities to grow and develop, not just get work done, but work that really develops me in very meaningful ways, and that others are invested in my development. It's almost, think of a teaching hospital, right, where that's part of the mission of the organization. And I would urge you, for the students, to find organizations that are very invested in creating that kind of environment that will enable you to fulfill your aspirations and your potential.
Great, thank you. Okay, with that, I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience. We could just do it with a show of hands. Does anybody have a question for the panel in general or a specific person on the panel? Go ahead, back there. Sorry.
No specific person.
By the way, when you ask her, if you could please say your name and where you're from, and then just a brief question.
Sure. Mike DeLucia, I'm from Columbia Business School, and I work in career management. And my question going to when we were talking about earlier about the fact that there's lower turnover of, for example, 5% of those who were participating in, let's say, sustainable kind of activities. I'm curious as to what extent then you actually would be looking for people as you're recruiting for those who are more likely to be participatory, let's say, and how you might assess that.
Well, I'll just comment then from our own experience at PwC. So we actually select individuals against those attributes I just discussed, right? Those 5 attributes. And initially, when we started volunteer activity, we found that the people who had the most time on their hands were doing the most volunteer activity. And that wasn't quite the intent. In other words, we wanted our busiest, highest performing individuals as well to be, and so we made a very deliberate focus on engaging all of our people. And it's also opportunities to lead, to develop, to lead teams. So there's a developmental element as well. So those attributes I discussed, those 5 attributes, are in fact predictive not only of career success, but of individuals who are going to be very engaged. And one element of that is involvement in our commitment within our communities. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Go ahead.
technical advancements of your company. Like apps is a big thing. A lot of companies are using a lot of apps now for kind of the ease of life, the ease of work. So what do you think about in terms of developing your technical infrastructure at the company to help retain talent so that their work is easier, their life is easier? Is that something that you're thinking about?
I don't think about it as easier as much as more efficient, I think. And and ultimately, they're going to do more work. It's still going to be the same amount of hours, perhaps. But I think there's so many great technological advances that make us so much more efficient now. It's incredible. Even just the American Express Axiom to make travel arrangements.
Anybody else want to comment on that? Anything else?
Huge issue. There's been a traditional gap between our experience as consumers, right, and the sophistication of the technology we're using as consumers, and sometimes in large organizations where there's a lag in investment. So we found with millennials, obviously millennials come in with very high expectations. And so it's an area we've invested in significantly. We actually just announced a joint business relationship with Google in addition to leveraging their cloud services. So it's a big area of focus for us because it can be both a pain point, a source of, because if I'm not efficient, it drags the day out, it creates all sorts of negative energy and gets in the way of quality work. So yeah, it's a real area of focus for us. And it's about being mobile too, obviously, not chained to a a computer.
For us, all of our platforms are mobile because our clients are demanding and everywhere. So we need to be able to serve them in the same way. And so just because of the luck of that, we've been able to create platforms and technology that allows everyone to work wherever they might be.
The only thing I'd add to that is that similarly for us, in which we're in a, our consumers are our lifeblood, and we're in a consumer-facing industry that both consumers and employees that are joining us, or prospective employees, the new millennials, they're demanding all this stuff. So you have to get with the program, or you're not sustainable as a company. The other thing I would say that again is probably one of the strengths of us having a global business is a couple of weeks ago we had a management meeting in China, and you sit here and you think, oh gosh, we're really advanced and the US is kind of where all the trends are beginning, and you go over there for we had sort of 1 week with a bunch of some of our younger folk just out in the market, and you're like, wow. I never even knew half this stuff existed. We got to get back, and figure out what we're going to do with this. So, we're driven. I think all of us are saying that we're driven to do it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
In the back there, in the corner. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Lisa Perlmutter. I work for Towers Watson, an HR consulting firm. Pointing over my PwC colleague. I saw a statistic that, and I'm focusing more on the Gen Y group, sort of right before the millennials. More than half of them are really more interested in being able to contribute to our world rather than being able to contribute to a company. More than half are not interested in working for a big corporate environment. And this is, our talent pipeline, right? These are the folks in their 20s now. What can large companies do to be attractive to that generation who really have no interest in working 9 to 5, who have no interest in the corporate ladder? Curious to hear your thoughts, since two of you work for pretty large companies as it is. So.
Two thoughts about that. Two thoughts. One, exactly what we've been talking about today, I think, being very clear on our purpose as an organization, and that's kind of an expansive purpose. It includes, for example, our commitments to our communities, the environment. So that's not just a kind of a superficial. That's part of who we are at our core, and that's an element of what we do through the year. So I think that's very important. I think creating the right environment, again, where people can learn and grow, that's certainly something that's we know is very important. The other thing I'd add, we're creating what we call a flexible talent network, because we have found there are people who do not want full-time jobs, but do in fact want to work with us for some portion of the year. Maybe they're entrepreneurs, maybe they're artists, writers, travelers. I mean, there's a whole range of scenarios. So we've actually created a flexible talent network of individuals who don't want full-time employment, but want to work with us for maybe 3 months or some period of time. So it's kind of an innovative approach to employment itself. And then the idea is that they would be recurring for some period of years as well.
Go ahead.
We've talked a lot about creating.
Can you your name and where you're from, please?
My name's Matt. I'm 2016 Emma, and work at a competitor of PwC. So maybe it's not a jab, it's just my personal experience. We spent the last hour talking about how important culture is, especially for millennials, just this younger group of our country. How do you create and sustain, not just create culture, but how do you sustain culture? I feel like, especially my corporation, we convey a culture, but it's a huge gap in the execution of culture, and maybe that's just different mindsets. Baby boomers leading the corporation, millennials executing the day-to-day. Maybe you can just shed a little bit more light on that.
Can I ask you a question about what you're saying? When it's for lack of a better term, the baby boomers who are running your company that are saying this is what our culture is going to be, this is where we're going to behave, do you feel like they're being authentic when they say that and they really feel that it's important for the company to have that culture and it's just an execution issue? Or do you feel that they kind of are saying this because an outside consultant said, hey, you guys should say this and this is what people care about. If you say this, it'll attract talent? Where's the bottleneck?
I there's a lot of just saying, Jesus, I could do this because 25-year-old John wants to have a social impact. I think there's a large gap.
So I'll start with that one. So our firm actually has a specialization in culture shaping, right? So it's based on the core human values: integrity, respect. There's an audit we do where we go to a company, we talk to their top leaders, and we have them answer some questions about where they are and where they'd like to be around those values. But to your point about culture, culture is evolving, culture is local, and culture can be shaped. So as you think about your organization, it's not the large organization that maybe you want to tackle, but maybe the team, the office, the organization, and think about what elements of the culture need to be changed or enhanced, right? So think about it from a behavioral perspective. Think about the culture your company had 10 years ago and what the culture is now. It's really those shocks of bringing in different peoples from different countries, different ways of thinking. That's how the culture moves. And how you sustain it is through the behaviors of the leaders, right? So really thinking about it from where you might impact the culture and then thinking about it systemically is how I would think about that.
You know, one of the things that we've done that has really shocked me how successful it's been the last few years is rather than people getting a review by their superior, me sitting and telling somebody all the good things they've done, all the weak things they've done, we have people do a self-evaluation. And as part of it, it really gives them a voice to talk about the company and things they don't like, things that they feel are weaknesses. I just recently sent out to a whole bunch of people and said, if you were me for an hour, what action would you take to change this company? And I think you learn a lot by doing stuff like that. But it's difficult to have a good culture. It's ongoing. And as I look back at 25 years, there's times, frankly, that I'm embarrassed about, that I'm not talking about publicly right now, but that I'm very aware of. And I think people just have to understand that it's not going to be perfect all the time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's just, as we was talking, I was thinking, at the end of the day, a culture there isn't really a company's culture. Do you know what I mean? A culture is just a manifestation of the people, right, that are in the company. And I was thinking that at our company, it's really kind of amazing, and a lot of people often say this, whenever we recruit, and I found this, if we have lawyers or corporate affairs professionals that'll come in, very often at the end of the interview, they'll say, you haven't asked me any questions about my legal capabilities, right? And we'll say, oh, but that's given. You're coming from XYZ law firm, or you've done this, you're fantastic. Every single question is about the culture, right? And we have like many companies, very specific. We're very informal. We have no offices. We work at tables with each other. It's jeans and T-shirts. It's very, meritocratic, et cetera. And so a very large part of our recruiting is just ensuring that folks really understand what that culture is, and that they know they're not kind of joining the company or necessarily the brands, but the culture as well, and that they're going to feel comfortable in that and they're going to thrive in it. And I think very often if you get that piece right, it makes everything else easier. And then the secondary thing I will say is that we have this amazing CEO who's but he will not have one single meeting with any stakeholder, be it employees, be it externally, be it investors, without talking about the culture of the company. Year in, year out, day out, day out. And I think that very much reinforces, how it lives within an organization. Yeah.
The only thing I'd add, it's a good question. I like it. It's an edgy question. And I think, there's a lot of cynicism today, especially in large organizations, about the gap between words, intents, and lived reality, which I think is what you're getting at. So a couple things. We ask our people to assess us, right? So we try and measure our progress to the extent we're delivering and living what we espouse. So we do that internally. We do that globally. We do it in the U.S. We also do it through independent third parties. Right, so both internally as well as independent third parties, Great Place to Work ranking is one example of that. They'll evaluate us through a randomized sample. They'll give us that feedback unfiltered. In addition, we've found it's interesting in terms of generational differences. At least, we're talking about sustainability and team activities. We've found a tremendous level of enthusiasm among our partnership, right? Who are typically not millennials, but that hasn't been such a significant barrier for us, really. So I think measurement and transparency around those measures within your organization is very important. That drives accountability, and it drives us looking in the mirror.
Let me offer you an additional just suggestion from some things I've heard today is speak up. One or two things is going to happen. You're going to get fired, right? Which there's two benefits to that. One is you'll feel the pride of speaking up about something that's important to you, as opposed to having it gnaw on you for the rest of your life. And you'll get very clear professional direction as to where you should be and where you shouldn't be. And what you hear on the panel today is that there's companies that do care about this stuff and are focused. Or someone's going to say to you, this has been bothering me. I know that we say these things. I feel like there's a disconnect out there. I've been waiting for someone to bring it up. How do you think we can fix it? And then you have another career opportunity, which is to accelerate your career because someone looks at you as a leader. I think the worst thing you can do oftentimes professionally is not speak up because you're afraid of the consequences. And there can be some difficult short-term consequences because you get let go or you have to go someplace else. But if you speak up and you do it thoughtfully and you do it without hubris and you do it from a perspective of this is what I'm seeing, but tell me your side of it, net and long term, I think you find that it's a great benefit to you and oftentimes to the organization that you're at. So we're at our 3:15 mark, so I don't want to hold people after. I want to thank everybody for being on the panel. I want to thank the organizers. You put together a really diverse panel, and hopefully people can hang around for a little bit after. There are some additional questions. So thank you, everybody.